I'm going to show you several different rulers and a couple different techniques to square these up. But the first thing I want to do is I want to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on the back of my lightest square. It doesn't matter which square, but I just did it on the pink side. So this will make 2 half square triangles. We've got 2 squares. We're going to put them right sides together, line them up, and then we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch down each side of this. And when we cut it apart, we will end up with 2 half square triangles. Now what I do is I like to cut mine. I know what my finished size of this one is going to be. Just for example, the finished size of this half square triangle, or these, is going to be 3 inches. So I know that if I want to allow myself just enough room to sliver trim, I'm going to round that up by 1 inch. So I cut my squares 4 inches. Now, if you know that your squares are going to finish to 3 and you're not interested in squaring up, which I totally get, some quilts have a whole bunch. Now, if you're not interested in squaring up, I totally get that. You'd want to add 7/8 of an inch to your finished size. So my finished size, when it's all stitched in a quilt, is 3 inches. So if I'm not interested in trimming up, I'm going to add 7/8 to that, and that gives you your seam allowance and just enough. I never have good luck with that, so I added 1 inch. These are 4-inch squares, and now I'm going to stitch them. All right, so now I want to get my ruler out. I want to cut this in half, right on my drawn line. So I line up my ruler. If these are small, I use my scissors, whatever. It doesn't have to be exact. And now I'm going to press to the dark side. That's normally the traditional way we press half square triangles. If you're sewing any of my patterns, that may change depending on how they orient with other pieces so that your seams will nest. But for demonstration, we're going to press to the dark side. Okay, the most important thing, no matter what ruler you use, what tool you use to trim these up, the most important thing is that you want a 45-degree line on your square ruler, okay? Because what we're gonna do is we know we're gonna trim these to 3.5 inches because they finish to 3. So before I catch my 1/4 inch all the way around in my patchwork, I know I want this to be 3.5 inches. So I want to make sure that I allow a little, and you only have a little bit of wiggle room with this. See, you can see it's just a sliver trim. If you want more, add a full 1/4 of an inch or 1 1/4 inches to your pieces before you cut them out. But you can see I'm going to barely be able to sliver trim, but I've got my 45-degree mark right down the center of my half square triangle. And if you don't, I'll show you what happens. So for this case, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get these out of the way, and then I'm going to flip this around, and I want to square this up to 3.5. So I use my 3.5 mark and around my edges, and I also still make sure that my 45-degree line is right on my bias. So when I finish that, I have sliver trimmed this, and this is exact. So that's one way to do it. You can use, it's harder a little bit, it's harder for my brain, but you can use even a rectangular ruler. You still have to have that 45-degree mark, and you've got to know what size you're trimming up to. I just prefer a square. It seems to work better for my brain, but there's no difference. You just want to make sure you're 3.5, 3.5. But you can see this is a 12-inch ruler. Okay. So another way that you can trim these is if you use the block lock. And I find that if my seam is pointing down like that, I have better luck getting a really square cut with my block lock. So here's my 3 mark, here's my 3.5. I want to make sure that it's all within my block, not like this, because now my unit's gonna be wonky. So I bring it up just enough that I've got a little bit around the edge. Now you can see that this gutter is right over my seam allowance, and this just locks right on the seam. It's just a little neater. It saves you that little bit of wiggle that you have to do to get the 45 precisely up the center. So now I'm gonna do both sides, and then I'm going to flip my unit around. And now if I don't flip my ruler, you can see this isn't working very well. This isn't going to work. I want my gutter to be going the right direction. And this is the gutter. It's cut down a little bit in here so it fits and locks. Just locks right there over your seam. Now I want to line up my 3.5, my 3.5, my gutters lined up, and now I can finish trimming. And then just like that, I've got a trimmed up unit. If I'm doing a whole bunch of half square triangles, a lot of times I'll just get them stitched as I go. And then in the evening, I'll bring a TV tray in and trim them up or iron them and then trim them while we're watching television. I'm going to show you how to use a couple more rulers to trim up. This is my newest favorite way to trim half square triangles. I've used the block lock rulers, I don't know, probably since they came out. So I like these Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers, and they come in a 2-pack. So you have trimmer A, which is for half sizes, 2.5, 3.5, 1.5. And then you have one for whole sizes, 2, 3, and this is the unfinished size. So I know I'm squaring these up to unfinished 3.5 inches. So I want to take my 3.5 mark and I want to line it right up on my seam, just like that. And you can see that it's notched for your dog ears. And I like this ruler because it saves me 2 sides of trimming. Then I carefully go in here and I would recommend using a little rotary cutter for this, just because I noticed that if I use my bigger one, it shaves off my corners sometimes of my acrylic rulers. So once you do that, now I'll press to the dark side. And now let's measure this and check for trueness. So we've got our 45. We know that we wanted to cut this 3.5 inches. So let's put that down. Let's slide it over a tiny bit. Sorry, I'm using these rulers that don't slide. You can see that my 45 degrees lined up. I'm right at the 3.5, right at the 3.5, and right at the edge. So this is my new favorite method, just because I can trim twice as fast with it, and it's very accurate. So love these. Check with your local quilt shop and see if they carry them. If not, ask them to. They're great. And then the other thing is, you can see that before block locks, this was my favorite ruler because you can see I've worn off all the edges. It's really hard to read now. I used to love it the best because it had such a bold center line. It's just really, really easy for me to get it on here, and it works the same way. I'm gonna make sure I'm trimming off each side a tiny bit. I'm gonna line up my 3.5, my 3.5, my diagonal, and then do the final trimming. This is also a great tool. They don't make these anymore. I think I have them in 3 different sizes. It's by That Patchwork Place. But anyway, you can see it is well loved. But I don't use it as much because, again, it saves me time to use these or the block lock, because the block lock, I don't have to futz around with that 45-degree line. But let me just show you, let's pretend we're going to trim this to 3 and it finishes to 2.5. And this is what's going to happen if you don't make sure your diagonal line is lined up. So say I know I want to be in the 3 mark. So I'm on the 3, I'm well within it. I can trim off of each side. Let's do that. Now, notice I'm not following my bias. I'm just looking at the edges. So now I want to square this to 3 inches, 3 inches. Let's get that lined up. I've got it 3 and 3, but you can see I didn't follow the bias line, the diagonal 45-degree line. I didn't line it up. And now look what happened. My seam doesn't come out at the point. And that's going to be a problem, because when I take 1/4 of an inch around each side, this is going to be super noticeable. So that bias line is really, really important. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to how to square up your half square triangles. I hope you find this helpful. Have a great day.